Okay. So we're going to be looking, as I said, the title is A Lot on Your Plate. There is a well-known feature, either conceptually or sometimes really, really physically, of people having a special platter or plate on their Seder table with certain items. And we're going to go into a little bit of the significance of what's there, what's not there, what could be there soon. What I want to start off with is the whole idea of having symbols as an integral part of the Passover celebration at the Seder. The Seder night is chock full of symbols, symbolic actions, symbolic items, symbolic foods. So who can, suggest, who can bring up any particular symbols that we engage in at the Seder celebration? What kind of symbols do we get involved with? Lynn?
The salt water for the tears.
Okay, so thank you. So we've got this stuff that it's not a real food. We don't run around using salt water most of the time, but we take this as a special item. So, and it symbolizes, as Lynn says, it symbolizes the tears of the slaves, of the Jewish people in Egypt. Okay, good. What other symbols do we have?
The charoset for the mortar.
Okay, Andy, so charoset, which is the paste that we make with, that's supposed to be some kind of sweet tasting paste with apples and fruits or nuts, if you can eat nuts, things like that. Okay, good. What else? So far we've got 2 edible items. Craig?
Roasted egg.
A roasted egg. Okay, so there's something that we have on the Seder plate, and most people don't actually eat the roasted egg at the Seder. Okay, so there's an item that theoretically is a food item, and yet we don't eat it. We just have it there. What kind of, I want to push it a little bit to other things or whatever. Think about also non-food things. Yes, Sarita.
Leaning.
What?
Leaning.
Leaning, right. Okay, so we're supposed to sort of recline. And what is that all about?
That's because that's the way that 3 people used to eat.
You might have to be a little closer to your mic. I can't hear you that close.
That's how 3 people used to socialize and eat.
Right, so it's supposed to be showing our relaxation or even feeling that we're free and we're enjoying the luxury of our freedom. So we act out how that is by leaning, whether we like it or not. So so that's a symbolic act. It's not the food itself, but it's a symbolic action that we do. Anything else that we can think of? Yeah, Lou.
Elijah's cup.
Okay, great. So there's an item. It's a cup. It sits on the table. Different people have different customs about whether they fill it up with wine or whatever at the table, but it's there. And again, like the egg, it's there as a symbol, but it's not there to be used by somebody who needs a cup, except unless Elijah shows up, which brings us to another symbolic thing that should lead us into another symbolic act or gesture that we engage in at the Seder.
Opening the door.
Opening the door, right? We open the door for Elijah, right? So that's something, again, we make it our business to open the door for this invisible guest, and we keep it open for a while. So these are different kinds of symbols. One more thing, or maybe a couple of more things. Craig, yeah.
We ask questions.
So, and how do you consider that symbolic?
Well, I mean, first off, it sets the tone for the evening. It leads into the storytelling that we will eventually do, and that in itself is a symbol because it's a symbol of remembering, not only for memory, but remembering and being part of this great event, this Exodus, becoming free.
Okay, so clearly the questions are essential for the Seder. The remembering is essential. The telling the story is essential. You're bringing up a really interesting point of when is something a symbol and when is it not a symbol? Before we get to that question, just John, yeah.
So what about the action of, dipping your finger in the wine for the plagues? It's not really food. It's not really.
Right?
Hey,
No,
action.
I would say that qualifies as a symbolic gesture, and what we're symbolizing is something to be discussed. When we're not going to go through all of that. Fern, yeah.
Inviting people who may need some place for Passover.
Okay, so that's again very essential. And we started off at the very beginning of the Seder. We say, hey, our doors are open. Anybody who needs it, come right in. So that's super central to the idea. Is it symbolic or not is I think something for us to wonder about, and then that's worthwhile. It's worthwhile thinking about it. Yeah.
It's both, because yes, inviting people is one, but it's also supposed to represent the fact of feeding people who may be hungry. and
Okay.
remind people of that.
All good. I would say one last thing with that. We have that as a recitation of invitation, usually after all the invitations are done. So in that sense, we're symbolically announcing an invitation that we really did 2 weeks ago. So at the Seder, when we say, okay, anybody who wants to come, by that time, nobody's hearing us, looking around for a Seder. So then it becomes a very symbolic invitation. But it shows how important that value is. Yes, Anita.
Having an orange on the Seder plate.
Okay, excellent. We're going to get to that a little bit later. How many people, just quick, how many people raise your hand if you've heard about having an orange on your Seder plate? Okay, I think a lot of people, good. But we're going to get that explicitly into that later. Good. I want to just bring up the fact that we have to drink 4 cups of wine.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not discretionary. It's not drink whatever you want, right? You can drink as much as you want from each of the cups, but we actually have a cup placed in the choreography, the whole program. It's there, and then it's there again, and then it's there again. So that takes something which could be a natural kind of act and turns it into something very formal with significance. And that's what's going to get to us into the next piece. Yes, Sarita.
What about also we have the matzahs? We have 3 matzahs.
Can't hear you.
Okay, so I know that you gotta, when you're talking, you gotta get close to the mic.
I
Okay,
can't
so
hear
we
you.
have-
I didn't hear at all.
Okay, so can you hear me now? We have matzah, and we have to have 3 of them, although some people have 4. You break the middle matzah. So all of this stuff around the matzah.
Okay, so we're going to get to the reason for the orange a little bit later. Somebody asked that question in the chat. It's definitely part of what we're going to discuss today. But Sarita's bringing up the fact that matzah is there, and not just 1 matzah or as much matzah as you need, but we start with 3 matzahs, and then some people add a different, an extra one, and that idea is making something that could be simply, hey, we need to eat tonight, into a symbol. The brisket is not much of a symbol except for maybe how good a cook you are. Yeah, Geraldine.
I came in late, so I don't know if you said, I heard you talk about opening the door, but what about the cup for Elijah?
It was mentioned. Yes, thank you. Very good. Okay, so I want to move along and just, we've noticed so many elements that are clearly symbols, obvious, or we can even start thinking more broadly about what is this whole way of specifying how to do things and how to go about the evening. The Seder night is saturated with symbols. It is characterized by a tremendous attention to symbols. So I want to now share the screen and point out that this idea of creating symbols to celebrate Passover is original to the first celebration of of Passover. So at the first celebration of Passover, we have the slaughtering of a Paschal Lamb, taking the blood of that lamb and using a kind of a moss brush, daubing that blood on our door, right? The Paschal Lamb itself must be roasted in its entirety, whole. It's got to be eaten in a group. None of the bones should be broken when you eat it. We have maror, the bitter herbs. We have the matzah. That was already mentioned. Nobody mentioned maror. Did anybody mention maror? No. Can you imagine? Unbelievable. But this was actually already specified in the very, very first Passover. So what's the deal? Why so many symbols and so focused on symbolic activity and symbolic foods? And I think that we have to understand that a symbol, at least here's a starting definition. A symbol is a unit of bundled meaning. Okay, that means it's some kind of entity. And as I say, it could be an act, it could be a gesture, it could be an item, tangible or otherwise. It's a unit of bundled meaning. In other words, it's full of meaning and it has maybe the potential of more than one meaning. So a symbol holds within it meaningfulness, and that meaningfulness can be understood in different ways. Passover was created to be an event full of symbols. Those bundles have two very, very important advantages. They can be carried with you. That means that they can be held from one place to another and from one time to another. So that means that the Passover, the original first Passover, was never meant to be a one-off. It was meant from the beginning to be the seed for a continuous tradition. And that tradition is carried forward because we've got those bundles. Just like when we leave Egypt, we carry these bundles on our backs. And because they are bundled meanings, the meanings can change. So the meanings can be transformed over time. And that allows the Passover celebration to keep on getting richer and moving along and personalized as well. Okay, so now I'd like to ask what has happened with these symbols? What has been carried along in our bundles? What has changed? And what have we added or subtracted? So this is pretty
Well, we
much.
subtracted the Paschal Lamb.
Yeah, we don't slaughter the lamb anymore.
We don't slaughter the lamb. We don't smear blood all over our doors, and that's, you know, can you imagine the post Passover cleanup that would have to be done? You know, it's bad enough that we have to clean up and to get into Passover.
And how much it would scare the goyim.
That, yeah, well, that might not be so bad. So, just kidding. Clearly we've dispensed with the Paschal Lamb. Do we have anything left over from that?
The shank bone.
So the shank bone is clearly understood, the zroa is clearly understood as that reminder, literally as a symbol. Back to Craig's idea of remembering. We remember stuff that even though it's lost to us, but we still remember it. Now that shank bone, let's understand, once upon a time, the Paschal Lamb was an active part of the Seder. So all the time that we had Passover, that we had temples, there was a Paschal Lamb that was slaughtered for every Paschal celebration. And hundreds of thousands, if not more, people would come and pilgrimage to the temple and celebrate Passover in Jerusalem. And they would have shifts there was just like this conveyor belt of people coming into the temple to slaughter the Paschal Lamb, slaughter the Paschal Lamb. So the idea that we have a zroa, that we have a shank bone, is a later adjustment to the fact that it's missing. What about the door? Is anything left over from that door? Well, somebody mentioned it before when we talked
Yeah,
about symbolic actions.
Opening the door.
Opening the door, yes.
Opening the
Unfortunately,
door.
I can't see everybody that's here. I can, because of the shared screen. So you have to either yell out or chat or do something. I don't know what. I can't
Is-
see chat either.
Is it
So,
the wine?
no, it's not the wine, but I think that Lewis is correct. We make a big deal about opening the door, and that's actually a recollection of the original Passover, but in mirror image, in reverse. When the blood was put on the door, John made the comment, that if we did it now, it would scare the goyim. In those days, it was meant to be a security marker, right? It was, okay, God will not afflict any of the doors that have any of the homes that have the blood on the door. The door was locked. Nobody was supposed to go out. It was unsafe for us to go out into the open on the first night of Passover. So what we do when we open the door is we actually do the opposite. We say, hey, that was then and now is now. We're in a whole different environment, a whole different historical moment. We can open the door, okay? And that wasn't, we take it for granted now, but for instance, in places where the Inquisition was active, this was a tricky proposition for many Jewish communities. That you open the door, you open the door, but you really didn't open the door. You opened the door when you went someplace where nobody would know that you opened the door, and it became very purely a symbolic act of hope for one day when you could open the door. Anything else from the Paschal Lamb that we have retained?
The afikomen.
So the afikomen is that recollection that we're supposed to end the meal by taking a bite of Paschal Lamb, and instead we use the matzah. So the matzah, think about it, the matzah has now turned into a symbol that has an additional level of meaning. Those bundles of meaning that symbols have allow the matzah to become endowed with more meaning than it originally had. What about eating it in a group? What did Fern mention before as one of the important elements of a meaningful Seder? Inviting people to come. And that means not just friends, but people who need a Seder. That's why we try to do that matchmaking in our community every year, one way or the other. So that's left over from the Paschal Lamb. Okay, the maror, we still have it, right? Matzah, we still have it. What else have we added to the to our symbols?
Can I make a comment about the maror and also the matzah?
Sure.
The matzah, we originally, there were 3 matzah, and then there was a tradition to add the 4th for symbolizing perhaps the Russian Jews who couldn't join in Seders. And then for the maror, there's a whole.
Very hard to hear you.
I'm sorry. So for matzah,
Can't hear you.
Something wrong with your mic, I think. I can't.
You
hear you at all.
you can't hear me?
That's
Now we
better.
can.
Now,
Okay, yeah, there was something wrong with my mic. So from the matzah, we started with 3.
we lost you.
Oh,
again.
now.
Move over,
directly.
move over to closer to Lou. I'm sorry to
Good,
tell
good,
you, you
good.
have to move closer to Lou.
Okay, I can do that. So
That's
I'm thinking
perfect.
the number of matzo, whether you do 3 and then the switch to 4, and also for maror, what counts as a bitter herb or not, is very variable.
Okay, great. Very good. We're gonna leave it at that.
What about
Also,
roses?
Karpas.
So, okay, so karpas, that's not here, right?
Charoset.
And charoset is not here, right? None of that is here. We've added those things. Okay, so now salt water was mentioned before. We added the salt water. It's not mentioned here, right? They didn't
Wine
need
is
a
not there.
they didn't need a symbol for yeah, good, Craig. They didn't need a symbol for salt water because they were crying already. Craig mentions there's no mention of 4 cups of wine. There's no mention of wine at all, right? That's something that we've added. Okay, very good. So here's one standard diagram for the Seder plates that we have now. The shank bone, that's the zroa. There's the egg, bitter herbs, charoset, and parsley means karpas. It doesn't have to be parsley. It could be any vegetable, anything that grows out of the earth. It could be a potato. It's anything like that. That's the karpas, and that is, as you see, kadesh. First, we make kiddush on a cup of wine, just like any other holiday meal. Then we wash our hands, and then we start turning the evening upside down. And instead of washing our hands and then making hamotzi, no, we wash our hands, but we eat a vegetable instead. Okay, so that's part of the idea. And then that vegetable we dip, right? One of the 2 times that we dip something. So how come there's no salt water here? The answer is because many traditions dip in charoset only. The charoset is the dipping item. So people would dip only in charoset, and salt water was added as a separate idea. So this brings us into all of the things that we've had again and again and again mentioned already, that people add, people change, people modify, people embellish. The salt water is an embellishment. Okay, what the parsley, what the karpas represents, we're not going to go into right now. It has, any number of meanings, and we can talk about that possibly if we have time. Now, I wanted to show you, here are some other, an array of Seder plates, so to speak. There's one big difference between these Seder plates and this Seder plate. The big difference is each of these Seder plates has 6 items, right? This one has 5, okay? One other point. Why is it in this order? Is it symbolic? So sometimes a plate is just a plate. This is what Freud said. Why do we have it in this order? Because this is the order that we partake of these things in the evening Seder. In the order of the night, karpas is our first item that we eat. And we need to dip it in something. If you have the salt water might be someplace over here or over here, but the dipping, this is the first act of eating that we have, right? Here we've got 6, and each of these has a shank bone and an egg, depending on, and this way is up, right? That's the up, so there's the shank bone and the egg. But what makes 6 instead of 5? Lynn?
In our houses, we use horseradish, so the second bitter herb just for dipping, for the sandwich,
Right.
not for dipping, sorry.
Right, for the sandwich. So we have 2 marors. And that's why sometimes you'll have it'll say maror and it'll say chazeret. Right, 2 different names for the same bitter herb idea. You can use the same maror for both of them, but these plates use them as separate items. There's a nice chunky looking charoset there. I want to, so what's the big major symbolic item that's missing from all of these plates?
Matzah.
Matzah. Where's the matzah? Where's the matzah? So here is a Seder plate. It comes from it comes either from the Ukraine or from Galicia, from Eastern Europe, and the cups for the items are on top here. That's the Seder plate, so to speak. And right here underneath are shelves, and you can open up the door, and that's where the matzahs are. This way the matzahs don't get crushed by the Seder plate items. They need to be left whole until we get to that afikomen part where we break that middle matzah, right? So here we have a very ornate, beautiful Seder plate that has all of these different kinds of items. This is for Elijah's cup. This
Yeah.
holder here is for Elijah's cup. So we
Rabbi,
have,
you said to interrupt. We use my grandfather's Seder plate and it has the 3 levels for the
right,
matzah underneath and it has a velvet curtain around them. So
right.
you lift the curtain and pull it out.
So it might look something like this.
Yes, very similar, but on the top are the places for all of the other items.
Right.
There
So
are
this,
glass dishes.
yes, so this is a much simpler work than the one that I showed you before. This was made by a boy named Bruno. I don't know his last name. He lived in a youth shelter in Switzerland during the war, and he had woodworking skill. And he made this when the war ended. He made this as part of the liberation celebration for being free. So it's left over from 1945, and he had the simplest kinds of materials here that you can see. And here are the shelves for the matzah, and there's the top for the all the items of the plate.
Mhm.
Here's a simple little song that you can sing. We can sing it together. And this is, it goes like this. It goes with this old man, right? So you can use the Seder plate, and after we figure out all the different things that we want to put on that Seder plate, we can use this as the way of actually helping us talk about the story at our Seder. So Karpas is number 1. Now it's time to have some fun for it's Pesach. Now it's time to celebrate. See what's on our Seder plate. Maror is number 2. I remember, so can you. For it's Pesach. Now it's time to celebrate. See what's on our Seder plate. Charoset is number 3 for our people's history. What is its history? What's the Charoset all about, actually? So the Morah, we remember the bitterness. What's the deal with the Charoset?
The
bricks.
mortar, it's the work that we did
bricks.
as slaves.
Okay, so that's one meaning.
The brick.
Anybody else have another suggestion? What does Charoset mean when you share this fact that we have this Charoset? Now, it's for the mortar. Isn't it a little ironic that the Charoset always has to be tasty and sweet? Right, and that's part of what we use it for. That's the dip. That's the original dip. So we take the bitter herbs and we dip it into something a little bit sweet, right? So what else could it possibly mean? Let's think a little creatively. What kind of sweetness could possibly be part of our history at that time?
Oh, we stuck together.
Right, and charoset is a sticky, mushy, kind of gluey thing.
And
Absolutely, absolutely.
frequency.
On the most basic level, what the sages said is that why do you use apples as a central ingredient? Because apples, the apple tree is a romantic image, right? You know, meet me under the apple tree. This is a Song of Songs image, and the charoset is a reminder that the Egyptians were not able to destroy our love for each other, and in fact, the romantic love between partners, and the fact that we kept on having children despite the terrible, terrible situations that were there. So charoset is not just about that mortar, that terrible slavery symbol, but it's also sweet because of what we found and how we insisted on making life sweet for ourselves. They wanted to make life bitter for us. We made life sweet for ourselves. Zroa is number 4. We are not slaves anymore. So that's, of course, the fact that it's the Paschal Lamb, but also the Zroa is the arm, the outstretched arm of God who took us out of Egypt. Okay? Hard-boiled egg, number 5. It's so good to be alive. So this is, of course, one way of thinking about why the heck do we have an egg on the Seder plate? What's it there for? And all kinds of answers are given by many people. One of the simple answers is that we have, in fact, if everybody's only supposed to have a little bite at the end of the meal with the Paschal Lamb, so what's the rest of the meal supposed to be? The answer is it's supposed to be the holiday sacrifice, the chagiga. So this is a reminder of the other sacrifice that we no longer have. And then, of course, other people talk about the egg as a symbol of new life, of the roundness of the egg, and so on. Salt water is number 6 with the vegetables we mix. For it's Pesach. Now it's time to celebrate. See what's on our Seder plate. Okay, so now what I want to do is relate to some of the things that people have mentioned and deal with the idea that we can change, we can add. So here is, I want to just look at this. This is printed by Whole Foods yet, of all people. And this is our pretty much standard items at the Seder plate without paying attention to making it in the proper order. Shank bone should be over here, the egg should be over here, because those are the ones that we actually don't deal with. We don't eat them, and the rest is down here. This is not just practical, but it's also the Talmud says, Ein ma'avirin al hamitzvot. Don't pass over a mitzvah. If you have an opportunity to do a mitzvah, don't pass over it to go do something else. So that's also a guiding principle in setting up the Seder plate, because each one of these things is a mitzvah. It's part of the mitzvah of celebrating the Seder. So don't have the charoset all the way over there and the shank bone down here. You're not going to be using the shank bone. Get the charoset close by you so that you can use the charoset as soon as you need it. Okay, so we didn't talk about the parsley or the boiled potato or the karpas at all. Does anybody have an understanding of why we have that? How you deal with it at your Seder? Yeah. Sarita.
So, can you hear me? So
Yes.
this, so one, it's the season, it's spring. So it ties to the season. It's also new life. So it symbolizes our renewal.
Okay, anybody else?
Our family uses a potato dipped in salt water, also something that we could grow from the ground.
Okay, good. Anybody else want to riff on this? Okay, vegetables are not exactly, well, except, maybe certain types of rarefied red vegetables. But in my association, in my mind, vegetables are pretty simple foods. They're very down to earth, in fact. And they are, people have sometimes, even during this pandemic period, created their own little vegetable garden to sustain themselves. Vegetables have that kind of like pretty basic survival association. And other people talk about the fact that vegetables grow out of the ground, and the idea that the ground is both the dirt, and with the meaning of also what's dirt, what's dirty, what's basic, and yet out of that dirt grows our own life and our own sustenance. Right? Our life comes out not out of diamonds and not out of the sunshine per se. It's the sunshine shining on rotting seeds within the ground, and then them sprouting out from under the ground and coming forward. Okay, here is now two interesting suggestions. If you're a vegetarian and putting a shank bone on your plate is something that feels uncomfortable, or simply, what do you want to be? You want to be reminded about eating meat? I don't want to be reminded about eating meat. I don't eat meat, and I don't believe that when the Messiah comes, we're going to eat meat. So what should you do? So here we say the roasted beet replaces the shank bone, right? Another vegetable, and you roast the beet. By the way, roasted beets are delicious. So that's another idea where we have a substitution, as we've done before. I want to point out that on our Seder plate, and when we get to the question about the orange in a minute, in our Seder plate, we hark back to a tradition that is recorded from over 1,000 years ago, where a letter was sent to the rabbis in Babylonia in the great academies there. And they said, how come we have 3 cooked items on our Seder plate? Now we don't, we have 2. We have the shank bone and the egg. Nothing else is cooked. It's all fresh. It might be ground up and so on. But the potato, maybe you're cooking, but you don't have to. You can have just plain fresh vegetables. So they said, how come? And the Talmud talks about having 2 cooked items. The letter came from North Africa somewhere and said, how come we have 3? And the Gaon, the eminence, the head of the academy, wrote back, we have 3 to symbolize, to represent the 3 leaders who took us out of Egypt: Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. So over 1,000 years ago, there was already the idea that Miriam has a place at the Seder plate. And her place is for us represented by the beet. In Hebrew, beet is selek. Selek means rising up and getting out. So the Talmud itself says that that's in Aramaic, that's an appropriate item to have at your Seder, because the very name of the food reminds us that we left Egypt. Here we have another idea. You're a vegan. You're not comfortable with eggs. What do you do then? So here we have a suggestion. When we think about springtime, vegetables may not be the first thing people think about when they think about springtime. What about the crocuses? What about all the other flowers that are growing? So here is a suggestion that to remind you of springtime, you don't have to be, just like Levy's rye bread, you don't have to be a vegan to like flowers, right? So that's another creative suggestion. Now we have here new traditions. And here we come to these various items. And here's our orange. So according to this page, oranges were adapted to the Seder plate in support of LGBT inclusion. That's not my understanding. Historically, the story that I've heard many times in various versions is that when early on, and Susanna Heschel, Rabbi Abram Joshua Heschel's daughter, has told this story, and I'm not saying that I'm telling it accurately, but it's been around there for at least a generation. When she started talking about the place of women in Judaism and the idea that we should be egalitarian, that we should all understand that we're all, full-fledged Jews, and the place of the woman is at the Seder table and not in the kitchen when we get to making the Seder, which is still, unfortunately, a norm that we haven't quite solved. Hold on a second. Yeah, I don't know what that is. The story is that the idea was greeted with anger, and a very outraged person got up and said, "Are you kidding? Women have a place at the Seder like an orange on the Seder plate." So the idea became, oh, this is a great idea. So let's put an orange at the Seder plate. So originally it wasn't so much for LGBT inclusion, as my understanding. It was a feminist statement that says, we were all freed and liberated from Egypt. And in fact, the rabbis in one midrash say, the only reason God kept on caring for us is because of the Nashim Tzidkaniyot, because of the righteous women in Egypt. If it wasn't for them, God, if it was just about how us men, behaved, we would have still been slaves to Egypt to this very day. So, and in our Seder, we make it a point to incorporate in the story that we tell the story of the women who played such a crucial part in freeing the Jewish people. We've talked about it many times. Pharaoh's daughter, there would be no Moses if not for Pharaoh's daughter. So, so many contributions that you can keep on thinking about in terms of women. Anyway, so many people have the orange on their Seder plate for these various kinds of reasons, either as an original feminist statement that, hey, we are all in this, and then expanding it. In many ways, the feminist argument and revolution was, to use an image from Pesach, the opening of the door for the idea of inclusion in general. So that the idea that then expanding it into LGBT inclusion makes a lot of sense. Here we have another idea, the olive, in support of peace between Israelis and Palestinians, or between any conflicting groups. We need some olives in this country after what I just read about who voted and who voted against, who voted for and who voted against the stimulus package to help poor people. We've got a real conflict in this country about whether poor people should be helped or not. This is another suggestion. I wasn't familiar with this one, that we have inclusion in a different way. Who are the people who are sitting at our table? There are people that are thinking back to this as their own story, ethnically, religiously, nationally. This is the story of the Jewish people, but we also have our loved ones who are here who want to be listening to the story, take part in the celebration, but they come from a different history. And finally, we have here the tomatoes, which comes from the original fight in Florida, where the Amaleki workers, that's an Indian tribe in Florida, who were basically the seasonal workers for the tomato harvest, and who were really, like in so many other places, the agricultural workers who are treated with no rights, no real adequate living conditions, no salary that means anything. So the idea that if we're against slavery, slavery can take many different forms. I will take a half a second to say that a living wage, that's something that Shomrei should be taking seriously and paying attention to. Okay, so now I want to stop at this point and ask everybody here to think for a minute, what would you think? And again, if you have paper, pencil, crayons, what would you want to create as a symbolic item to add to the Seder plate so that it could be part of the continuing unfolding and retelling of this story? What other things possibly could you put on? And let's think about this as it could be very abstract about some kind of political concept that you have, or it could be very, very personal. As I said before, we've all gone through a hell of a year, and maybe that engenders certain kinds of thoughts, images, feelings that you want acknowledged, or that you want to acknowledge on behalf of people that are going to be part of your group one way or another, either in your consciousness or actually tuning into your Seder or there at your table. What other things could we put on this Seder plate? Okay, so let's give it 35 seconds. And I'm going to actually, for a second, I'm going to stop sharing so I can see everybody. And let me see, what did I miss in the chats? Okay, very good. An orange on the Seder plate, thank you. Okay, so we've dealt with that a little bit. So anybody, okay, Nick, I see your hand raised first. What would you suggest?
It's not a food, but a mask. It symbolizes a lot.
Okay, so there you go. It doesn't have to be a food, right? Items that we have at the Seder can be all kinds of symbolic things, and a mask obviously is a useful item, right? Don't leave home without one. But by putting it on the plate, you turn it into a symbol, right? Just like any of these things that we do use, like matzah. Matzah is a food. When we put it in a certain place at a certain time and treat it in a certain way, it becomes a symbol. So that mask, you have now symbolified it, right? I just made up that word. What do you want to, what would you, as part of the Haggadah, as part of the telling, what would you say? You know, here's this mask, I point to this mask, we point to the matzah, we say, here's this matzah, it's blah, 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 blah. Here's this mask, go ahead.
We have a responsibility to one another, to protect each other, to care for one another.
Okay, great. And like I said, it's a bundle of meanings, every symbol. So that's a beautiful starting point. Maybe it engenders more discussion. Maybe there are other meanings that other people have when they see that mask. Yeah, Audrey.
Maybe, this will be the first time in a year that my children will be with us for Passover. So I'm thinking of an instrument like Miriam had after they were freed. I mean, that is such a nice image for me. I really feel that, just to be with 4 or 5 people at a Passover Seder is, it really feels like freedom.
Okay, great. And in fact, there's going to be a workshop a little bit later about making a Miriam's tambourine with Rachel Cantor. So people are invited to that. Jean, yeah.
So I like to talk about at the Seder, if I think people won't be bored, I like to talk about history and how there are elements in the Passover part of the Torah that reflect historical places and people. And I love talking about the Egyptianizing parts of the story. I'm a bit of an Egyptology hobbyist, so I love talking about that part. I don't put anything on the Seder plate about it, but I love like taking a little time out to talk about the actual history.
So I would encourage you to think about, so what could I do to take this thing you love so much and that you find so interesting? What could you use? What kind of object could you create or bring in from your research to have that as something to, as a holder for that, as a unit of that meaning that it has for you? For me, as I'm thinking about what you're saying, there are so many beautiful Egyptian kinds of images that we know of from museums, from archaeology and so on. There's a famous stele, a big standing stone with writing on it that has an Egyptian pharaoh, Merneptah, saying, "Hey, I've wiped out Israel. No more Israel." So wrong. But actually, that is the first mention of Israel that we have in any archaeological finding, is that Israel no longer exists. So that might be something as a trigger to put out there. Thank you, John. Yeah.
Well, just to comment about Egypt part, it'd be interesting also to think of a way to commemorate the Egyptian victims of the death of the firstborn. Undoubtedly, there were many innocent people who did nothing, who died.
Right.
The other thing I was thinking of is like an empty vessel on the Seder plate for people who are food insecure, people who don't even have what's on the Seder plate.
Excellent. Great. Good. Let's more ideas. Sarita, yes.
Okay, hopefully you can hear me. So yeah. I had a suggestion, but to take off also, you talk about bundles of meaning. The empty vessel, John, I think also that could symbolize all the people who are gone now because of the pandemic, who are not able to celebrate the Seder. So that's something that could symbolize. I was thinking about something like a chain that symbolizes the passing down and the connection between people and the passing down from generation to generation, that, you know, you could sort of pass the chain around the table as people share their part of the story or discuss the symbols, things like that.
So, wow. So I just want to comment, I can't help it, that you're using the chain as a chain of tradition when my first association is the chain of slavery. Right? So look at how that same item, that's the idea of the bundles, right? That's the idea that the same item can flip and can take on different kinds of associations. Very good. Yeah, John, you raised your hand before.
Oh, just so what Sarita said about missing people, we were thinking of just setting the table as we normally would. So we'd have empty places at the table to commemorate those, because we can't have Sam, we can't have everybody here, and then we would normally have other people over. So
Right.
it would be a good way to just remember that
Right.
physically.
Good, right? Or that empty chair idea that some people have put forward. Any other suggestions? Anybody want to raise their hand or scream out?
Greg is raising his hand.
Oh, there you are. Yes.
There I am. So I was, well, first off, just answering what somebody else said, I think it was John, who said, talk something about, people who, innocent people who lost their lives. We do that at the Seder. We spill the blood, we spill the wine, which symbolizes loss of life. But what I was thinking of,
Specifically the loss of life from the plagues.
right,
That
that could also tie into the mask thing. But
Right.
what I was also thinking of putting a ballot on the Seder plate, because reading today about the move to restrict voting rights, I would take a paper ballot. In fact, I would probably tear it partly in half to symbolize that it's a broken thing.
Right. One of the points that I tried to make this past week when I talked about voter suppression was how important speaking is at the Seder as a symbol of freedom. When you are enslaved, you're not allowed to talk. When you are free, you say what you want. And the idea is that the Seder, we talk and we tell and we explain and we ask and we have, as much conversation as we want because we're free. And suppressing anybody else's ability to speak up, which is what a vote is in a political environment. Hey there, how you doing? What do you have to say, Parrot? Is a suppression of their fundamental humanity. So yes, a ballot might be a good thing. I want to, unless there's somebody else who wants to bring up something, I want to point out one thing in addition. Creating this, I think I want to encourage it. I think it's an exciting idea. And you can do this and set this up ahead of time for your Seder. If you have people who are coming to your Seder by Zoom or otherwise, you can also either invite them ahead of time to think about this so that they will have something to share at the Seder, this kind of question, what would you like to add? So that's a way to enrich the participation. And another idea is that we've done this occasionally at our Seder and actually at Shomrei when I ran a community Seder some time back. Sarita remembers this. She mentioned it. And that is, one second. We gave out Play-Doh to everybody. Play-Doh is not chametz, despite the name. So we gave out Play-Doh to each person at the Seder, and then we spent some time where each person could fashion, something out of the Play-Doh that they had, and then talk about it, and then put it there, and on the table, and say, "Here's my contribution. Here's my addition to our Seder plate tonight." So that's something that's traditionally for Yontiv, you can still do it because it's not a permanent thing that you're creating. It's not writing or drawing. If you're not, averse to doing those things, whatever it is that's acceptable in your group, you can have this as part of the activity of the Seder itself. we have a couple of minutes left, and I wanted to show one, I think, pretty interesting and provocative offering with regard to a Seder plate. And this is, I'm not saying as a substitute, but as an addition. This is called the African American Seder Plate for Passover by Michael Twitty. And he talks about, he is an African American master chef. I'm sorry that Eileen isn't with us anymore, but he's created a prize-winning cookbook called The Cooking Gene, I think. And here he talks about creating a parallel Seder plate that resonates with him. He's Jewish, African-American, he's gay, and he is very thoughtful about, and he's supposed to be a tremendous cook. And here he takes the inspiration from the Seder plate, and each of these items he brings out of the Southern cuisine, out of the Southern cooking experience, and out of the African-American, specifically African-American Southern experience. So it's hard to read, but for instance, what he calls the hoe cake or the ash cake, he says is made of corn. So if you're okay with kitniot, that's something that you can use on Pesach. The closest analog to matzah, the flatbread of slavery, and yet the first food of freedom. This corn cake, simply prepared, was the hardtack of enslavement in colonial and antebellum America. Okay, so and then he mentions if you don't eat kitniot, don't eat it. So very much the idea that you can bring other items based on whatever resonates with your own experience. I want to thank everybody. There's another session starting up right this second. So thank you so much. Have a very sweet Pesach. And I hope that this gives some ideas for people about what to do to enrich their experience this year. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.